Good evening and welcome to this YAPF event, Communicate event. My name is Andra Antone, Senior Architect at Ryder Architecture, and I'm one of the members of the YAPF committee. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Before we start, we'd like to tell you about our next event, which we're hosting online on Thursday, the 10th of June. We're delighted to be able to welcome developers Tyne to talk about delivering high-quality sustainable housing with two architectural practices they've worked with recently, Mole Architects and 2019 Sterling Prize winners, Michael Riches. All three parties have worked together recently to submit an application for the redevelopment of a shopping centre in Milton Keynes with a vibrant new neighbourhood. We'll look at this and other projects such as Marmalade Lane and Goldsmith Street to understand what it takes to deliver exemplary housing from sketch to site. Tickets are free and available to book now from the RIBA Northeast Eventbrite page. This evening we're introducing Jonathan Seebacher, Director at Ryder Architecture. Johnny has joined Ryder in 2003 and has a wealth of experience across master planning, civic, residential and office sectors. He has been instrumental in growing Ryder's portfolio across the UK and internationally. Johnny leads the Ryder Alliance, an international alliance employing pioneering research and technologies to redefine architecture practices with Ryder's partners around the world. He led Ryder's portfolio of building at Newcastle Helix, an exemplar of sustainable urban development, which combines prestigious commercial and residential space with first-class research and education facility in the heart of Newcastle. And tonight we'll be looking at one of these buildings, the Lumen. Please remember to put your questions in the chat at the top of your screen, and we'll be discussing these at the end of the tour. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Johnny.
Thanks, Andrea. Evening, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Thank you for having me this evening. I shall share my screen to start with. Hopefully this will work. And I'll just give hopefully you can see that. I'll just give a very quick overview of the Helix for those people who might not know it, who might not be from Newcastle. And then we'll dive into the tour of the building itself. Screen. Yeah, I'll start with that. So that is the Helix master plan. For those people who don't know, Newcastle Helix is a 24-acre site in the heart of the city centre. Just off the page there is St James's Park, whole redevelopment of the St James's area, Gallowgate area. And this is Helix. It was the site of the old Newcastle breweries, so famously where Newcastle Brown Ale was first came from. Before that, it was a coal mine. It was a brewery for 70 plus years, and about 10 years ago the brewery was closed. The brewery was subsequently demolished. The master plan came forward, and then a number of buildings have obviously appeared in recent times. In the last 5 years it's really gathered pace. It's a joint venture between Newcastle City Council, Newcastle University, and then more recently Legal and General, who are our client on the Lumen, for example. In terms of how the master plan is set up, anyone who knows the city will know that this eastern part of the master plan is pretty much complete now. That comprises of a university quarter, the Catalyst building, the USB building and the Teaching and Learning building. They form a sort of cluster of university buildings around Science Square. To the south of that we have the Newcastle Labs, the Spark, which is a spec development building, and the Lumen, which is a spec development building, which I'll talk about this evening. Ryder have been fortunate enough to design and deliver all three of those buildings, and we're currently looking at plot 9, which is earmarked to be a 25-storey residential development, which will be going into planning shortly. There's a hotel in for planning at the moment, which we should see on site at the end of the year, a multi-storey car park, and a district energy centre which provides energy for the whole site. And it's been quite a pioneering master plan at its time. It was the biggest, I think it's still correct, it's the biggest mixed-use master plan outside of London. And obviously the pace it's been going at has been quite phenomenal in terms of what's taken place in the last 5 years to go from an empty remediated site to the development we see today. And just a few visuals on the right hand side there. An early visual of the build to rent, the Spark building, which is on site, a view looking up Drayman's Way, which picks up the Lumen, the Spark, the Labs building, the core building by Faulkner Browns, which many people will know, and the build to rent scheme, again another sketch in the background, and then the image at the bottom there of the university clusters of buildings. So we've got the USP building, which is a scheme Ryder delivered, Shepherd Robson's Teaching and Learning Centre, and GSS's Catalyst building all around Science Square. So a really vibrant mix of, as Andra said at the start, commercial office use, residential and university sector. And then we have an aerial view, so again you can start to see those buildings I just mentioned to the south of the site there. And then this top portion of the site is earmarked to be residential use. So the City Council are actually actively looking for development partners to bring that forward in the coming years at the moment. So hopefully we'll start to see activity on this portion of the site in the very near future. But you can see how close we are to the sort of urban core and how Helix knits in with everything that's happened in recent times. Obviously these buildings, the University Builders School, they were developed some time ago. There's plans afoot to develop the St James's scheme. There's an office building being built here for Home Group, and then the development further down East Pilgrim Street. So really important development for the city, and I guess we're putting Newcastle on the map. And then Lumen. So Lumen was a scheme we first got involved in about 4 years ago. It was an architectural competition at the time. They went out to 5 bidders, shortlisted that to 3. We developed the scheme a bit further and were fortunate enough to win. The brief was to develop 110,000 square foot of Cat A office development, the first Cat A Newcastle development Newcastle's had in probably about 12 to 15 years. And if you speak to the agents around the town, there's always been a shortfall of Cat A office space in the city centre, which has a big impact on the economy of the region in terms of attracting and retaining businesses in the city centre, who have often gone to other northern cities, Leeds, Manchester, Sheffield, etc., who could cater for the needs. So not just an important building for Helix, but an important building for the city generally. And that's just a very early visual. And the reason I've put that visual in, I think something we're particularly proud of, is how close the as-built scheme actually looks to that visual. But the building was conceived as a double height ground floor space, which would be animated by a large public reception with some co-working space, a cafe to the east, which spills out onto Firebrick Square, and we'll link into what's happening with the Spark. And then, because by virtue of the levels, we're being able to create a lower ground floor, which again can link through to that office space or can be a separate demise. We've also got planning permission, so this, if needs be, could be turned into a bar or restaurant if the office market isn't there. Floor plates themselves then stack up over 7 floors, with the top floor stepping back to form 2 large generous terraces. And obviously the views to the east towards the river are absolutely fantastic. You get a view of the Tyne Bridge, the Millennium Bridge, the Sage, the Quayside, etc. So really fantastic views from that outlook. And then again, just a close-up of how we saw that ground floor operating back at sort of concept design stage with the entrance. We've created a large overhang and set the ground floor plane back here. So we've got a large cafe space. There's actually a cafe bar being fitted out at the moment, and that can spill out under the natural cover of this last bay and then onto the square beyond. So again, really trying to animate the square and create a really vibrant place to, I guess, live, work and play. Once Helix is complete, there'll be 4,000 people living or working on the site. So this really does become quite a major component of the current city fabric. And then there's just a shot of the building at night, which was just taken recently after completion. So you can see how we've been quite successful in creating that ground floor animated footprint, the overhang, and then the floor plates above. This halo light feature, which really sort of marks the building on an evening. And just sitting in front of Blue Star Square there with the Corby to the right of us as we look at that shot, and you can just see recently completed Hadrian's Tower in the background there. But highly transparent, really sort of see what's going on in the building. And again, a shot at daytime, so again you can just see how that's come together. we developed this as a very sort of simple but rigorous language around the facade. There's essentially three planes across the primary grid, which create depth, and then a really high performance glazing to give us the U values and the thermal performance requirements that we need. And then next slide. And then really, there's a brand new brochure that's been created in the last week, so I thought it was worth just sharing that because it gives a probably a better snapshot of the scheme than what I could do in a presentation. But as it says there, it's a new standard for Newcastle, and I think that's very important. We worked really hard with the likes of Cushman and Wakefield to develop exactly what was required in the marketplace to ensure that the building was successful for the city. That's a view looking for St James's Boulevard. Each floor plate is 15,000 square foot, and that's very important because whilst the aspiration is to obviously let this floor by floor and get new investment in the city, the average take up is typically about 5,000 square foot, so the floor plates can be very easily split down to accommodate that sort of market requirement. You can see the terrace there on level 7 with this sort of halo effect that wraps around the top of crown detail. Just detail of signage inside. A shot of the sort of the staircase arrangement that takes you up to the main entrance. Anyone who's walked around Helix, there's obviously a very comprehensive and detailed master plan that sets out some of the ground rules, if you like, for how the buildings fit in within the site, and landscape, quality of public realm has been absolutely fundamental to the success of the master plan as it currently sits. We work really hard with our partner UB to develop the landscape strategy on what is quite a demanding site in terms of levels, creating, you know, immediate access up, but also level routes, places to sit, places to dwell, places to work outside. Was all part of the brief and the strategy to develop the scheme as it is today. And again, just some metrics there around Helix itself and some of the buildings that I mentioned earlier, which I'm sure some people will reference. But Lumen sits on the corner of St James's Boulevard and Drayman's Way. So in terms of that route particularly from Central Station and from Gallowgate, where the main footfall comes from, so you've got Monument Metro and the City Core. The Central Station's about a 10-minute walk down there. It really forms a gateway into the site. So we come in, we see the core, we see the Lumen, there's a square, and the Drayman's Way really takes you all the way up through the site. There's some fantastic public realm in Knowledge Square, which is being finished off at the moment with water features, sustainable urban drainage and the likes. Again, more places to sit and dwell, which links into Science Square and the university campus. So you can see how it ties together really well. The majority of Helix is pedestrian only as well. There's some service routes that obviously the buildings need to be serviced, but in terms of those key routes through the site, fully pedestrianised. So it's really, you know, it's a place for people as opposed to a place for people with cars, which has always been an important driving factor when developing any scheme on the site. And again, just another shot of the elevation there and a shot of reception, which I'll come on to and show you the Matterport survey. And then, like I said, there's a retail strategy that sits along that master plan. Part of that retail strategy is the ground floor components of the Lumen building. So as I said, there's a coffee shop cum bar being fitted out at the moment, which will complement some of the other retail uses that are planned for the site, which hopefully, once we're through the sort of post-pandemic sort of world, all of that stuff will really start to come to light. And as I say, 4,000 people living and working on the site, it's going to become a really sort of vibrant part of the city, that not only for the people who work at Helix, but people who want to sort of gravitate there and use the facilities that are on offer. Again, some co-working on the ground floor. And again, just more of the details. So, you know, we've really worked hard on some of the details to really make sure this is sort of exemplary for Newcastle. We spent L&G are the second biggest owner of private property and development in the UK. They have £1 trillion worth of assets. So and their sort of their business model is to invest in sustainable urban master plans such as Helix. So their attention to detail has no bounds really. So everything from the master plan down to the TAP specifications reviewed in a huge amount of detail, just to pitch it right in terms of the market aspiration. And just a shot of the sort of open floor plate there. We've got 2 columns in the entire floor plate, and again that was something we tried really hard to get. So there's always a minimum of a 15-meter span from column to window or from core to window, and that just allows us to fit the space out as flexibly as possible, and make the building attractive to the widest possible audience as possible. And there's a real blurring the boundaries at the minute between historically what a tech company would want and what a traditional law firm would want. Historically have been 2 very different things. I think there's a real blur now in terms of what people want from an office space and what employees need to provide for their employers, just to make it a really vibrant place to be. And I think that'll become even more evident having gone through the last 12 months of working at home. And again, just a shot of the floor plate there, some numbers, but good little diagrams of the floor plans here. So a really simple, efficient core, 2 stairs, 6 lifts, WCs and back of house to the rear. That obviously repeats all the way up on levels 4 to 6, taking advantage of the views to the south. So there's little inset terraces, which again, outdoor space is really seen as an attractive proposition. Private outdoor space, and that's something we worked hard to integrate into the scheme. And then, as I said earlier, level 7 set back somewhat and some sort of quite significant terraces, one which enjoys views over the rest of the Helix development and one which enjoys views towards the River Tyne. But really efficient, and then you can see there just in an unencumbered column-free space. And then just its location in the city, which I don't think we need to dwell on. That's a very brief overview of obviously Helix and how the building is set up. So what I'll do now is I'll stop sharing that screen and I'll switch to the Matterport survey, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with. But if not, we've recently invested in a Matterport scanner here at Ryder. And we use that on a whole host of jobs, whether it be during construction, during completion, once we've had completion, surveying existing buildings, etc. And it really gives you a fantastic sort of insight to how a building's put together. So this is standing in reception. We've come from Blue Star Square, which is outside. That's the core building. We've come into reception, large double height reception desk, turnstiles, waiting area, etc. The clock, I must stress, has absolutely nothing to do with Ryder. It's something that gives me sort of shiver down my spine every time I walk in reception, but it is what it is. This area is blanked off. This is the cafe space I talked about. That's under construction at the moment. So the cafe space will have a direct link into this office and become an extension of that lobby space in due course. And then we've got the first of the sort of main office spaces on the ground floor. By virtue of the levels, we're naturally elevated above the street, which is really nice. And this is a double height space at ground floor, which again, really nice, quite unusual. But this area also has planning permission for a bar/restaurant, so there's the opportunity to knock through the floor below or sling in a mezzanine floor if we wanted to. So the structure, the MEP, the floor has soft spots. That floor being designed in from day one to make that really easy should the tenant want to come in. And then there's a staircase and a lift that link into a small office space on the floor below. We can just go down quick. Again, small office space down here. The city council have aspirations of turning this into a sort of an incubator unit to link in with what's happening with the core. I think one of the main selling points of Helix is that it's a place for obviously excellence in research, excellence in academia, and you've got a lot of people doing research, academia, setting up businesses. They could then move to the labs building or the core building, get small, really great value startup space, and then move on to bigger premises such as this as businesses expand, and it keeps that in the city rather than you know, the historic sort of, I guess, people doing their degrees and then moving to London as they once would. But that gives you a flavour of how the ground floor stacks up. If we just quickly skip to a typical lower ground floor. So underneath here we have a lower ground floor. As I said, we've got a basement. Basement high houses all of the back of house facilities and all of the staff amenity facilities. So if I just start at the back of this corridor, by virtue of the site levels, we were able to get a dedicated access for cycles and runners from the rear of the building. So anyone running to work, cycling to work, can come straight to this rear door, scan their fob, in the come, and then into sort of a typical day in their life, they can come down here. They've got access to, there's 110 double height bike stands. They can get rid of their bikes if they've got one. That's all secure, CCTV and access control, and then they can come through to showers on either side if they want to drop into a shower. There's locker rooms, drying rooms, and then there's the main changing spaces, male and female, which house a series of locker space, changing space, and shower space. So you know, really high health club specification, if you like, in terms of the facilities on site for people, and obviously well-being, BREEAM Excellent being sort of key components of this. The building is BREEAM Excellent rated, and obviously these facilities like this go some way in sort of helping achieve that target. From there, a dedicated lift, and that lift would take you to your floor plate. So it's a really efficient use of space in terms of getting people to work in the morning, so to speak. Excuse me. On a typical floor, which I mentioned earlier, this is on level 4, sorry. This gives you an idea of a typical floor. So really large floor plates. As I said, 15 meters clear from column or core to the glazing. So 15 meters that way. So really really generous spans, which allow us to fit out, and we'll show you what the opportunity of a fit out is in a moment. We went for exposed ceilings throughout, which again is becoming more and more popular. I think people, you know, the older school spec officers, which are trying to sort of keep up with the times, are starting to rip a lot of ceilings out. I think people benefit from that extra daylight, that extra volume that gives, and it gives more opportunity for flexibility in the fit out itself. But the cores just wrap around, and then as you can see, the small terraces that we've introduced on the higher levels, and just this will give you an idea of the view beyond. So obviously this is at level 4. You get obviously great view of Hadrian's Tower. Even at level 4, you can still see the Tyne Bridge, the Sage, the Cathedral, top of the Millennium Bridge, etc. On a clear day, you can see right to sort of Sunderland and beyond. So the views are absolutely fantastic. And then as we go the other way, see the core there, and then go to the other end, and we get a view of the wider Helix master plan. So as I said earlier, that's Spark, which is currently in construction. This site here, which is empty, is earmarked for the build to rent. We can see the back of the Catalyst building, then the back of the Teaching and Learning Centre with the USB building beyond, and Science Square beyond, Energy Centre, which powers the whole site. A multi-storey car park that is currently being constructed. Try to minimise car parking on site. That's the only road in, the only road out, to keep the rest of it pedestrianised. There's 500 cars for 4,000 people, so I think everyone would probably prefer no car parking at all. In terms of that sort of climate change response, but I think a necessary evil at the moment. And then back to the core itself. Again, just show you a bit more. So the core space itself. So the core is obviously devised as a very, as I said earlier, very simple sort of layout, which we work quite hard to get. It's then configured as a T arrangement. The reason it's configured as a T arrangement is so that if the floor plate is to be split into 3, each office can have a front door and a front of house and a really warm welcome. But the lifts come out into this main lobby, We designed bespoke signage, bespoke graphics, worked with the branding guys. A sort of a primary entrance to the floor plate there, fully glazed, and like I said, one on each side, and then the staircase is beyond. There's a cleaners cupboard, an accessible WC, and 2 WCs on each floor. And again, we worked really hard just to develop the even the toilets themselves are sort of quite impressive in terms of full height cubicles, and introducing a bit of glazing to the back of the toilet there, so just to provide natural daylight, and again take advantage of those views down the boulevard. That's how that stacks up. And then obviously, just to give a flavour, 2 escape stairs, all identical, feature lighting throughout, which follows the rise and fall of the stair. Big graphics, and there's actually an art installation at the moment, which is in both the stairwells, which is quite an unusual and nice thing to do, which the City Council have organised with Legal and General. And then finally, if we drop down to level 2, this is Homes England. Homes England were one of the first tenants in the building. They've taken a floor and a half, and it's their new northeast headquarters. And they've obviously developed this through the COVID pandemic with their design team, and this just gives a flavour, I guess, of what the opportunity is on each floor plate. So in through those doors I just mentioned, really generous front of house reception space, and then a series of different workplace settings throughout, from which they can, you know, meeting space, hot desking space. Interestingly, Homes England have got about 280 staff, but only 80 desks. The rest is breakout space, collaboration space. People can drop in and drop out as they see fit. But you know, they've had to do very, very little to the base plan in order to facilitate this fit out, which is something we were keen to do all the way through. But you know, great range of spaces, very sort of, you know, lounge type spaces, taking a cue from the sort of hospitality industry, and this just wraps all the way around. So, you know, fantastic work environment. I was actually in there today showing a client round, give them ideas for their workspace. Collaboration zone here where the teams get together. Just continue on through, you know, back of house, a lot of facilities, meeting rooms. It's all very neatly planned and to away. And then obviously just go back a bit. Just continue. Kitchen space, breakout space. So a real mix of spaces, but obviously all within that same floor plate. So very quickly that floor plate's been able to be sort of broken up into different zones to facilitate that. So we just come back to the lobby, and again, what we'll do is we'll share this link after the meeting so people can have an explore on the model themselves. Very easy to use, a bit like using Google Earth in terms of wandering around. If you go to Doll's House View, that just gives an overview of the whole building in terms of what we scanned, and we'll share that afterwards. There's a data point being dropped in there which takes you to the website if anyone's interested in the Lumen website, and that will link you to the marketing brochure and a few bits and pieces that I showed earlier. And hopefully that's of interest. It'll link you to the wider Helix development as well. So that's a very quick canter through. I'm not sure if there's any questions, Andrea.
Yes, so thank you very much for that. That was a really great tour and really impressive quality actually. So we'll now take some questions, so please feel free to type in the chat box, and we'll drop, as Johnny said, we'll just drop the link there to the Matterport tour so you can walk in your own time after this event. So there's a few questions coming in. So you mentioned it's one of the largest master plan developments in the UK after London. It seems like it's also trying to attract talent with some brilliant workspace opportunity. There's a real mix of users, and it's also close to universities. Any thoughts around where the city is heading and what the vision is for Newcastle?
Oof, there's a question. I think, obviously, Andrea, you know this, but I was part of the delegation that went down to Mippen with Newcastle last year, the year before last. I think Newcastle's a bit of a it's almost a bit of a sleeping giant, I think, when compared to some of the other northern cities. And I think it's master plans like Helix, master plans like East Pilgrim Street, the plans at Stevenson Quarter, the plans for Fourth Yards, really sort of big thinking to get Newcastle on the map. And I think if you can marry that kind of big thinking with the, all the amazing other benefits that the region has in terms of, we've got city, coast and countryside, which not many cities can sort of say they've got all three of those. If you can attract people to the city, great quality of life, put that in the mix, then it could be a really vibrant place to live and work. And I think that's their idea, really. They want to attract more inward investment, and they want to keep 50,000 students on the doorstep, and they want to keep a lot of them in the city and retain that talent in the city. And I think it's master plans like this that are going to help fulfill that aspiration.
Yeah, and I think it's that whole debate around having a better lifestyle, isn't it? It's probably among the first years where people starting to move out of London and see that there's so much out there, so much opportunity.
Yeah, and you could probably argue that will become even more prevalent post-COVID, but who knows?
Were the main anchor tenants involved at the start of the project to develop the space, or were the tenants approached after the design?
They weren't involved. We worked heavily with Cushman and Wakefield and Avison Young, who were the two agents on the scheme. So we did a huge amount of workshops with those guys, with Legal and General. We visited a lot of exemplar buildings, particularly in London, because L&G's view is that London kind of sets the bar in terms of office design. So that's what we should look at. We should compete with London, not compete with the rest of the north, was kind of the aspiration from a design and quality point of view. We looked at their previous development, big scheme, number 10 and 12 Hammersmith Road, which people can look up, fantastic building. And then we just worked with the tenants, who obviously have a lot of market intelligence, but there was no pre-lets on this building at all. And to be honest, it hasn't really been marketed yet, and it's probably about 40% full now, which is probably testament to, quality of the building, I guess. But they'll really start pushing the marketing once, once the world returns to normal in the coming months. Interestingly, Spark, which is the next building along which we're doing, already has a pre-let with a prevalent law firm, and there's 6 floors of that already taken. So, half of Lumen gone, half of Spark gone in a COVID market is quite impressive.
Yeah, it definitely sets the standard up. There's another question around, so it was won as an architectural competition with a strong vision. How did you find the process of keeping that vision throughout the process, tender and site execution, and how long did it take to design the building?
Okay, so the design of the building was probably it was quite quick. It was probably about 12 months from a blank piece of paper to starting on site. Competition, what we did was we brought in a full team under our leadership so that we could present a holistic approach, and we also included some friendly property agents that we knew, so we could sort of back up the design with market intelligence in terms of what they wanted. And then in terms of the budget was quite tight. There's obviously the budget is derived from what rents you can get in Newcastle. The idea was that this would set a new standard for rent in Newcastle, which it has, is £26 a square foot, which, to put that into perspective, that's probably 25% of what you would get in central London on average. And that drove the price. So we had to come up with something in terms of the facade that was very, very high quality. The planners pushed us extremely hard in terms of getting to that, but it's actually very simple. It's just a wrap of curtain walling. So whilst we feel it looks really successful and quite, I guess, sophisticated, it's actually quite simple and quite cost effective in terms of how we've done it. And it was locking that in early. We locked a lot into planning. We did a lot more work for planning than what you would normally do. We submitted strip sections, we submitted details, we submitted product information, so we made it incredibly hard for anything to change post contract award. And then the other thing Legal and General do, they go out to tender on a single stage 4, which for all intents and purposes in terms of the level of the amount and detail of information, it's almost like a traditional tender in terms of that. But once that's fixed, they're not interested in changing anything. They've invested in Helix for the next 40 years, so they don't want to just get their money and run, they want to stay involved. And on top of that, once the contract came on board, I actually went to sit client side, and I had a client side role to make sure that that design intent and that quality was kept intact, while we had another team at Ryder with a Chinese wall developing the packages with the contractor.
It's a good way of keeping that quality, isn't it? Like getting on the client side. Also, it's interesting what you touched on about planning. I think the Newcastle planning for that area, at least the vision is to try and create this high density out there city centre and trying to build a skyline. So it's interesting that that's being encouraged. It's brilliant for Newcastle. There's a few questions around sustainability. I'll just compile these. I think you've already touched on some of the topics. I think at the time the building was designed, there wasn't as much guidance and targets, yet the building is visionary its approach. Could you give us a brief run through some of the environmental strategies and aspirations of the building, of the master plan?
So I think the big thing about Newcastle Helix is that it's powered by a district energy centre. So there's an energy centre on site, which all of the buildings have to hook into and adhere to. So that's one thing. The building's BREEAM Excellent, and it has an EPC rating of A. At the time of, we're going back to assess the, there's an exercise going back in time now to assess the amount of carbon that was used from an embodied point of view, and we're tracking the operational carbon just to see how the building performs. There wasn't as much prevalence around net zero carbon at the time of designing this, and obviously I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but obviously net zero carbon probably in the last 12 months has become, really prevalent in terms of everyone wants to do that. So BREEAM Excellent, the energy centre is a really efficient way of providing energy, hot water, etc. to the building, which it does. And interestingly, the City Council, the energy centre is actually producing surplus energy at the moment from Helix. So they're actually looking at how they can extend. So for example, they might extend that down St James's Boulevard to some of the other properties that they own, which is a really interesting idea. But that was probably it. It's also wired score platinum. And then what people might see on the Matterport is they've actually, there's a data screen now in reception, which tells you exactly how much energy is being used, how much carbon's being used, how that compares to week on week, etc., etc. And obviously we won't know the full picture of how the building's performing until it's full and until everyone's sort of back to work full time. And we also, the other thing probably to note is we worked really hard with Saint-Gobain glass company to develop the facade details. So we've got really high performing U values on the solid elements of the facade. Likewise with the glass, we've got a really high performance glazing with a really low U value, as a 0.21 G value. But we worked really hard to keep the glass as clear as possible because we didn't want dark or black glass, which can look quite obtuse. So there were some of the measures we did.
Oh, brilliant. So we'll just take one more question. If there's anything else, we'll draw this to a close as we're approaching quarter two. Do the spaces have a focus on well-being design for the occupants? If so, what are the features?
We didn't go down a certification route. We looked at the WELL standard, but the costs were just prohibitive. It's a very expensive standard. By the time you add in another consultant, their fees, price of certification, etc., etc. We followed some of their metrics. So I think the big one we did, we've got more air changes per minute than what is required under the BCO. That was a big thing we did. But beyond that, it's really down to the fit outs themselves in terms of the office space. Obviously, we've tried to We've got really high performing low LEDs and the lights are all automatic, etc. That all helps, and we've got really good high quality staff. I mean, even like the bike store, changing space, they're all things that people expect now in the workplace and ultimately add to well-being. But the main office space will come through from the fit outs, which interestingly on the fit outs so Homes England wasn't a Ryder design, but we had a role again client side just to make sure that everything that we're doing fitted in with the vision of the building, and didn't sort of was in line with what we wanted to achieve. And we're actually doing some fit outs at the minute for a law firm and an online retailer, so hopefully they'll come forward and come to fruition in the coming months.
Great, thank you very much. I think that's all the questions, and we'll draw this to an end unless anyone has anything else. Just a quick reminder to register Thursday, 10th of June for our next event. It will be with developers Tyne and the architects Michael Riches and Lumen Architects. Thank you very much all for logging in today, and that's all from us. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Johnny.